He said they took them in. When are they coming here? He said they why didn't you make this thing like 87?
Are you joining us?
I am. Okay. I'm going to be moderating the Q&A.
Thinking about it.
I'm here.
You ready?
Like there are many of them who are lawyers.
In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Peace and blessings be on all of you, and the mercy of God and the blessings of God. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We want to welcome all of you to Adam Center, and really we're honored to be able to host this event. You know, myself, I've been a fan of some of the organizations here. I went to a Karamah event in DC one time, and they welcomed. It was open to many people, and there was a lot of women there. And I really, as a Muslim American, I was impressed with the venue and with the reaction. They were talking about Muslim rights in Islam. And just, I was looking around the room, and you were seeing a lot of women from other faiths, and they're like, really? You know, that's a right in Islam? They were becoming interested, and just being exposed is something that is very special. So I want to thank Karamah for being involved, as well as the Constitution Project. And that in and of itself is something that the name says a lot. I went to England one time, and there was a man there who was setting up the sound system. And he said, you know, that Constitution that you have in America is so beautiful. Just wish you guys would follow it. All right? So the Constitution Project and trying to get this country to uphold the goals and the objectives of the Constitution is a wonderful effort. And the National Religious Campaign Against Torture, you know, this is not an easy subject. You know, I served in the United States Air Force for 4 years, and you know, as a youth director here at Adam Center for the past 7 years, I would ask the youth, because sometimes talking about it in the third party, torture is wrong, we have to stop this. But I said, if someone had your mother, you know, or your family, and death was inevitable, and you had to get the information out of it, I said, yes, it does cause you to really challenge your ethics, your beliefs, to find out what is your cutoff before you become a monster. We all have to dig deep inside of ourselves to find out where is our cutoff, where is our threshold. And as a community, as a group, not just one faith, but multiple faiths, we are able to adjust our moral compass to keep each other in line. Because if it's just me, perhaps I may do something that I regret for my own family. I'll do something horrific. But if I have other people around me talking to me as my conscience, then I can really begin to talk about torture. I can really begin to talk about these issues in the society. So I'm really happy that we have a forum here. This is an open forum. We hope to have some good conversation with the people that have come. We want you to bring up ideas. We want to challenge your ideas. We want you to challenge your ideas. It's through that discourse that we come up with amazing ideas. It's through the tension that you find diamonds. And so we want to really welcome everybody. Qurtuba for really hosting this. Qurtuba is the adult education wing of Adam Center, and bringing these three organizations together: Karamah, Muslim Women Lawyers for Human Rights, the Constitution Project, and the National Religious Campaign Against Torture. Thank you for coming to Adam Center. Thank you for having this event, and we wish you the best, and we wish you success. Thank you. Imam Magid is my, what I call my mentor and my boss. Imam Magid was not able to be here because he is traveling to Nigeria right now. And as he's currently the president of the Islamic Society of North America, as well as, which is a national organization here in America. They have a convention every year with about 30 to 40,000 Muslims that come together. In addition to that, he's also the imam of this community, and he has overseen an exponential growth of this community from going to 3-4 families to what you see now in a span of about 20 to 25 years. So it's really a blessed community, and he's a blessed individual. And he's over in Nigeria really trying to work with the leaders there to try to negotiate some type of resolution, some type of way, some type of path to resolving the issue and bringing the girls back, inshallah. So God willing, on behalf of Karamah. And this is where partnerships really come into play, where you have a network of, first of all, Muslim women and women in general. We wouldn't be anywhere without the women of faith. I don't know what community you come from, but every community that I've been a part of and every community that I've visited from other faiths, and I went to the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, and I've been to, many of my family is of the Christian faith. There's always active women at the front of any Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Sikh, Baha'i, any place of worship of faith. Is led by the Muslim women. It's led by the women. And so Karamah being one of the organizations to assist and help Imam Magid going over there to facilitate, we want to thank you for that. And I think that the women here will attest to the fact that without women voices in the world, and I'm happy to see more women leaders becoming around the world, it will help to create a discussion, because men, we have one perspective. Women has a different perspective. Youth, children have a different perspective. People of different faiths have a different perspective. So all these organizations have brought you all here together for your own perspective. And we hope that you can bring that out tonight and share that. Thank you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. There's some... Okay, I'm actually just going to hold it. It interferes with the scarf. My name is Aisha Rahman. I'm the Executive Director of Karamah. On behalf of Karamah and the Constitution Project and NEARCAT, the National Religious Campaign Against Torture, I would, like to thank the Adams Center and Cordoba Institute for hosting us this evening. Thank you to Brother Salam for his kind introduction. Speaking of strong Muslim women's voices, I do want to mention that there are some young women who are having a bake sale. They're showing entrepreneurship at a very young age. They are Girl Scouts that are local to this community. If you all want to indulge in some dessert after having some of a meal here. I will be serving as this evening's moderator, and I'm hopeful that we will have a very strong conversation after you hear from our very esteemed panel. And so without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce our first speaker, and then we will hear from her and then go on. Inshallah, there will be a break for Maghrib, of course. Dr. Azizah al-Hibri is a professor emerita at the T.C. Williams School of Law, University of Richmond, having served on the faculty from 1992 until her retirement in 2012. She is also the founding editor of Hypatia, a journal of feminist philosophy, and the founder and chair of Karamah, Muslim Women Lawyers for Human Rights. For the last 2 decades, Dr. al-Hibri has written extensively on issues of Muslim women's rights, Islam and democracy, and human rights in Islam. She has published in a number of legal publications and authored several book chapters and articles. Dr. al-Hibri has also traveled extensively throughout the Muslim world in support of Muslim women's rights. She has visited 14 Muslim countries and met with religious, political, and feminist leaders, as well as legal scholars on issues of importance to Muslims. In 2011, Dr. al-Hibri was appointed by President Obama to serve as a commissioner on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. She is the recipient of the Virginia First Freedom Award, presented in 2007 by the Council for America's First Freedom, the Lifetime Achievement Award, presented in 2009 by the Journal of Law and Religion, and the Dr. Betty Shabazz Recognition Award presented by Women in Islam in 2006. She earned her PhD in philosophy from the University of Pennsylvania in 1975 and her JD from the same university in 1985. She was also named a Fulbright Scholar in 2001. And she was on the Constitution Project Task Force that did the report, of which there are copies in the back, on the topic of the evening, which is what she will be addressing. Thank you. Just make sure the scarf isn't touching it, because then it interferes. Yeah.
I want to make sure you're hearing me all right. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The Constitution Project's task force on detainee treatment was formed over 2 years ago. And during this time, it had a large donated budget and a skilled team of lawyers and investigators that traveled around the world gathering information about detainee treatment. The team reported to the task force, which met regularly to discuss and assess the results. The task force was quite diverse. It was constituted of 11 members. Other than myself, none of them were Muslim. They were Christians and Jews, males and females, Republicans and Democrats. They included high-ranking officials with careers in the judiciary, Congress, diplomatic service, law enforcement, and the military, as well as experts in law, medicine, and ethics. Yet they all willingly embarked on an important, sensitive, and perhaps controversial project. They issued a consensus-based report at the end of that project, concluding that the United States had engaged in torture. Why on earth did such an illustrious group do such a thing? The answer is very simple. All members of the task force, without exception, had one important thing in common. We were all deeply patriotic and committed to this country and its constitutional values. We deeply believed that this country is a country of laws. We were concerned about disturbing information coming to light about the treatment of detainees in our custody and the possible involvement of high-level officials in the executive branch in this matter. We were also concerned that the current administration declined, as a matter of policy, to commission an official study of what happened. So the Constitution Project, under the leadership of Karamah's old friend, Virginia Sloan, brought us together in an effort to safeguard our nation's founding charter, the Constitution. That was our reason for tackling this subject. We take our Constitution and human rights seriously. The results of this study is shocking to me. The most notable finding of our panel was that it is indisputable that the United States engaged in the practice of torture. My colleague, Ambassador Pickering, will share with you the full findings and recommendations. I will share with you today some stories from our 560 pages report, which I really hope that at least some of you will read all of it and some of you will read at least some of it. First, let us note that there were many sites where detainees endured cruel and painful punishment. We have all heard of Abu Ghraib, but that was only one of many sites. Many detainees were rendered to countries known for practicing torture. The belief was that if the U.S. could not extract information from these detainees, torture in these rendition sites would. This also has proven to be a false assumption, and many innocent individuals suffered because of these renditions. Here's how our report describes this development, and I quote, "After September 11, a huge range of covert operations were authorized, including the creation of joint operation centers in other states to capture terrorists abroad, render and interrogate them. Through the newly expanded network, members of the rendition group at the CIA's Counterterrorism Center were authorized to capture suspects all over the world. And according to CIA officers, and now we're quoting what they said, members of the rendition group follow a simple but standard procedure. Dressed head to toe in black, including masks, they blindfold and cut the clothes off their new captives, then administer an enema and sleeping drugs. They outfit the detainees in a diaper and jumpsuit for what can be a day-long trip. Their destination, either a detention facility operated by cooperative countries in the Middle East and Central Asia, including Afghanistan, or one of the CIA's own covert prisons referred to in the classified document as black sites. To put it differently, many of these detainees were rendered to Muslim countries. Are you hearing me? It is important to note that these governments to which these people were rendered were Muslim majority populations, Muslim countries. One wonders, how dare these governments claim to be Muslim or representing a Muslim majority country when their own behavior flies directly in the face of the Quran and the prophetic hadith? Let me share with you something from our tradition. Around 1400 years ago, Khalifa Umar stated that he, in Medina, would be responsible for a mule in Iraq who stumbles because Umar did not fix the road. The Prophet himself prohibited the mistreatment of animals, including cats, dogs, donkeys, and birds. You know these stories. I don't have to tell you about them. But in today's world, leaders of Muslim countries have engaged in human torture. And there is no task force in those countries to study their actions and take them to task. And that is very sad. We have heard about sleep deprivation and waterboarding in the news about the treatment of U.S. detainees. Here's what the report says about them. I'm now sharing with you some stories from the report. The person says, while we were being shackled in standing position for purposes of sleep deprivation, while they were being shackled, detainees were kept in diapers rather than being unshackled or allowed to use a bucket or a latrine. The CIA told OLC, which is the Office of Legal Counsel, that releasing a detainee from shackles during sleep deprivation to urinate or defecate would interfere with the effectiveness of the sleep deprivation technique. In May 2004, the Office of Medical Services guidelines list diapering as, quote, generally for periods not greater than 72 hours as a standard measure. Prolonged diapering as an enhanced measure, and states that the only medical limitation on diapering is evidence of loss of skin integrity due to contact with human waste materials. In 2005, however, the CIA assured OLC that diapers were regularly checked and changed if soiled, and detainees had not developed skin lesions. And the longest period for which such a person was deprived from sleep was 180 hours. The OMS guidelines describe waterboarding as by far the most traumatic of the enhanced interrogation techniques. I want to tell you about it because we heard all sorts of things on the news. It's nothing, it's something, it's bad. Well, for reasons of physical fatigue or psychological resignation, the subject may simply give up with waterboarding, allowing excessive filling of the airways and loss of consciousness. An unresponsive subject should be righted immediately, and the interrogator should deliver a subxiphoid thrust to expel the water. If this fails to restore normal breathing, aggressive medical intervention is required, and so on. Some people receive an inordinate amount of waterboarding consecutively. There were also cruel and inhumane interrogation techniques. The report states about one person called Al-Qahtani. He was detainee number 63. He was suspected of being the intended 20th hijacker in September 11 attacks. In October 2002, he was interrogated with military dogs present, deprived of sleep, and placed in stress positions, all while in isolation. When this failed to yield intelligence, Joint Task Force 170 halted the interrogation and began developing a new special interrogation plan, leaving him in isolation, etc. I'm skipping now to them. He started showing signs of hallucination, but I'm skipping to the next paragraph because of time. A publicly released interrogation log dated November 23rd of 2002 to 2003 shows that his treatment only became harsher. Al-Qahtani was interrogated for approximately 20 hours a day for 7 weeks, subjected to strip searches, including some in the presence of female interrogators, forced to wear women's underwear, led around on a leash, made to bark like a dog, and subjected to cold temperatures. Al-Qahtani was also forcibly injected with large quantities of IV fluid and forced to urinate on himself and given repeated enemas. According to this log, they said they were treating his constipation. So, now I'd like to talk to you about forced feeding. With Ramadan approaching, it's something to think about. We hear a lot about it, but do not fully understand it. Forced feeding was one solution to hunger strikes. But why did these people engage in hunger strikes? It had been used at Guantanamo before, most often to protest allegations of guards desecrating the Quran. According to Camp Delta Standard Operating Procedures, MPs are instructed to avoid handling or touching the detainees' Quran whenever possible, and may only do so when security requires it under strict guidelines, which include the presence of a chaplain or a Muslim interpreter. According to news reports, a Quran was kicked, withheld from detainees, and put in a toilet. Sami al-Hajj, who was one of the detainees, he is now free, told task force staff of his first hunger strike at Guantanamo as a protest. We used it for 1 day, 2 days when they do something bad for our holy Quran. He then went on to describe what happens with forced feeding. They're supposed to feed you with 2 cans, small cans, but they feed us 24 cans and 24 bottles of water, continuous. And we were throwing up. It continues, and we're throwing up, and it continues. This is one feeding. It would take 8 hours like that, and you are in a chair. This is one feeding until your cell becomes full of vomit. And after that, when they come and remove the feeding tube from the esophagus, they would grab the tube and just walk away with it. Then there was blood coming, and the guard takes it from you, and he goes to another detainee directly and inserts it without cleaning. I don't know how many of you have had a reason to have a tube inserted in your throat. I had, for medical reasons, twice. These were the worst moments in my life, and they were done by a very careful and caring medical team. This is not what we are reading here. So I close with this section from the report. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of Guantanamo today remains the infinite nature of detention at the facility. Detainee counsel Joseph Margulis emphasizes that Guantanamo has changed. Well, we don't know. Some people say, it changes from time to time. The quote says, Guantanamo has changed. It's not that prison anymore. And when the administration, the Bush administration or the Obama administration, describe it as a very different facility, in significant respects, they are right. Guantanamo's moral bankruptcy now is not that it is built around the creation of debilitating despair. Its moral bankruptcy now is that these guys are held without ever having been charged or tried or convicted of anything. This is really just what I could work in such a short time of talking to you. You need to read the report. But I'm showing you how deep we went to try and find out what is happening. So where do we go from here? You live in a country of laws. If you do not like what you heard today, go to the ballot box. Vote for someone who represents your worldview, your values, your concerns. Sitting in a corner and being angry is not going to do anything. Join the political parties, speak out, and make yourself heard. There are decent people in this country. 2 of them are behind me today. 3, who are doing this job on your behalf. It is time that you embrace the rights and obligations of your citizenship. You shouldn't be relying on others to do work that you ought to be doing. And they are doing it with you. Become active and constructive participant in this society of laws. And when you do, you will have a real role in preventing injustice. Wassalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Dr. al-Hibri. Next, we will hear from Ambassador Thomas Pickering. Thomas Pickering is the Vice Chairman of Hills and Company, an international consulting firm providing advice to U.S. businesses on investment, trade, and risk assessment issues abroad, particularly in emerging market economies. Until 2006, he was Senior Vice President for International Relations of Boeing. From 1997 until 2001, Ambassador Pickering served as the U.S. Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. From 1989 to 1992, he was Ambassador and Representative to the United Nations. In a diplomatic career spanning 5 decades, he has served as U.S. Ambassador to the Russian Federation, India, Israel, El Salvador, Nigeria, and the Kingdom of Jordan. Pickering also served on assignments in Zanzibar and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. He also has served as the Executive Secretary of the Department of State and Special Assistant to Secretaries William P. Rogers and Henry Kissinger from 1973 to 1974. Between 1959 and 1961, he served in the Bureau of Intelligence and Research of the State Department, in the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency from 1962 and from 1962 to 1964 in Geneva as political advisor to the U.S. delegation to the 18-Nation Disarmament Conference. He earned the personal rank of Career Ambassador, the highest in the U.S. Foreign Service. Most recently, he helped lead an independent State Department panel charged with investigating the attacks on the mission in Benghazi. Pickering entered on active duty in the U.S. Navy from 1956 to 1959 and later served in the Naval Reserve to the grade of Lieutenant Commander. He earned a master's degree from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. Upon graduation from Tufts, he was awarded with a Fulbright Fellowship and attended the University of Melbourne in Australia, where he received a second master's degree in 1956. He is also the recipient of 12 honorary degrees. Ambassador Pickering.
Assalamu alaikum. It's a delight to be with you, and thank you very much for your very kind, if somewhat lengthy, introduction. I'm pleased to join the others on the panel, and I want to focus your attention very briefly on the major results of our report. You've heard from one of our members already about the kind of mistreatment that was perpetrated on individuals detained by the United States after 9/11. Our report was shocked by what we found out, and our conclusions in every way were very straightforward and designed to call public attention to this ill treatment, but most importantly, as you have heard already, to strengthen the idea of the rule of law in the United States, while at the same time doing everything we could do to assure that this kind of treatment is never repeated against anyone in this country. Our conclusions were straightforward. Our work was to provide an accurate and authoritative account based on real facts about what actually happened to detainees. It was clear, and the main point of our report was that torture took place. Our second major conclusion was that high-level Americans, from the president on down, knew in fact that torture was being carried out, and indeed in many cases they condoned and even encouraged it. These very important findings are significant because they indicate that there was not just laxness in the effort to enforce the rule of law. There was, in part as a result of 9/11, and in part as a result of fear that 9/11 might be repeated, a willingness to set aside the protections of the American Constitution, about which you've also heard, and seek to find ways illegal in the United States to try to force people into confessions of one kind or another. It was very clear to us, a third finding, that there is no clear or persuasive evidence that any of this treatment, torture, cruel, inhuman, or degrading punishment, all part of the same activity, ever produced any information of any value. There are people who affirm that they believe it did, but they refuse to provide details, data, facts, and figures. And we believe that our conclusion is correct and that it was their responsibility, if they believed in fact that torture produced anything of use, themselves to come forward and defend that position. Their failure to do so was clearly an indication of the weakness of their assertion and their argument. We also took a look at many of the circumstances surrounding the use of torture, including the detention of many people at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. We looked very carefully at that, and we recommended that it was time to close Guantanamo Bay. And we provided a series of ideas about how to do this. As you've heard, the report was unanimous with just one exception. A very few people in the committee that prepared and approved the report felt they had a different view on Guantanamo Bay. Let me talk about the majority view. In very simple terms, we felt that individuals who had already been approved for release should be released, sent to their home country. We added a note that said they should be not sent to countries where we knew they would be rearrested and torture practiced on them. We also said that where there was evidence, they should be tried. We said that the trial should take place in accordance with the highest standards of American civil, not military justice, and that it was significant to do that. We said, finally, if there were any cases where people could not be tried because the evidence was tainted and could not be returned to their home countries because the treatment certainly would be assured to be worse, perhaps, than they had been given in the United States, they should be kept in this country, moved from Guantanamo to the United States, and kept in facilities designed for people who were awaiting deportation, and that every effort should be made to find a safe place for which they could be deported. These are difficult issues, and they're very divisive. We also felt that the Department of Justice, at the time that these people were detained, made serious errors in their advice to the President and to our military leadership on how these individuals could be treated. Now, we believe that any future advice by a small group in the Department of Justice on these critical issues needs to be fully reviewed in other departments and agencies. That did not happen, and other departments and agencies, when they found out, objected to the conclusions of this small group in the Department of Justice. We also believe that the Department of Justice should publish these findings, not keep them secret, particularly if there was no reason to keep those particular findings secret. It was important to us as well that where prisoners detained by the United States were turned over to foreign countries for further imprisonment, that mere assurances at a diplomatic level that they would not be mistreated had proven to be so weak and ineffective that they had to have further assurances for any such action, including the regular requirement for the United States to see such prisoners and to debrief them, and an opportunity to recover those prisoners if they were being mistreated in foreign jails. We found that the medical profession had been misused, and some of them willingly, in the treatment of detainees. They had been asked for advice on what procedures could be performed, entirely contrary to their oath as medical practitioners. Psychologists had been used to help to design treatment which was contrary to the ethical practices of their profession. And we believe that medical practitioners should not in any way be associated with the treatment of detainees in the future, but of course continue to practice their profession of healing. We felt there was no reason why ideas that were recorded on paper related to the treatment of detainees should continue to be kept in secrecy. We also found out that the figures prepared by the American Department of Defense on detainees who had previously been released and their re-engagement in conflict with the United States were suspect. We found, for example, that those who were confirmed to be so engaged were lumped together with those who were only suspected to be so engaged as a way of inflating the figures in order to demonstrate that large numbers of people who were released were engaging in military conflict in the United States, contrary to the factual basis on which that particular suggestion or that particular decision would be made. We believe that it is also important that in dealing with these particular issues, a number of our recommendations should be accepted. First and foremost, that the United States should formally acknowledge this mistreatment and indeed enact new legislation to strengthen the possibility that the government would never again engage itself in those kinds of activities. I mentioned as well a number of our recommendations with respect to individual findings that the Commission made with regard to taking steps to assure that it could never happen again. Our particular group, as you've heard, was bipartisan. It was widely representative. It indeed contained experts in many subjects, including both judges and lawyers of long experience. The report that we had prepared was based entirely on our own research on information that was not protected by classification in the United States. The fact is that we had an ability to interview former detainees, talk to many people associated in the system of holding and treating detainees, who themselves revealed to us their deep concerns about the activities in which they had engaged. It is very important that at the same time we did our report, the United States Senate Special Committee on Intelligence was reviewing thousands and thousands of pages of classified documents provided to them by the American intelligence community, which covered exactly the same subject. Senator Dianne Feinstein from California, who chairs that committee, has made it clear that she believes the conclusions of her committee report are parallel to and reinforcing ours. We got to the same conclusion through different roads, but with the opportunity to examine the full range of material that was in the files. Senator Feinstein made a powerful speech 2 months ago asking for the declassification of the 300-page summary of a many thousand-page report which her committee has prepared. The White House has been responsible for that activity. We heard today that the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, General Clapper, has told Senator Feinstein that she will have the report hopefully fully declassified on or before July 4th, which is great news because we had expected that there would be a lot of foot dragging before this would happen. This is very important because, in effect, it will reinforce the effort we made to put before the American public, you here, people all around the country, the mistakes that were made in the hopes that you and others will use your rights at the ballot box and influence politicians to make sure this never happens again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Pickering. Our final speaker is the Reverend Ron Stief. He is an... This doesn't like me. An ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, and he has been named the next executive director of the National Religious Campaign Against Torture, an interfaith organization of more than 325 religious organizations committed to ending U.S.-sponsored torture. Most recently, Reverend Stief has been based in St. Augustine, Florida, developing a faith outreach program for next-gen climate action, as well as assisting Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice California, a federation of grassroots faith-based organizations, in launching a faith-rooted economics training series for congregational leaders. From 2009 to 2012, Reverend Stief served as an Associate Director of Policy Link, where he instituted the National Demand Equity Now grassroots network, promoting local strategies for economic empowerment. From 2006 to 2008, he was the Director of Organizing at Faith and Public Life, managing faith outreach leading up to the 2008 presidential election. From 1999 to 2008, Reverend Stief was director of the Washington, D.C. office of the United Church of Christ. He led advocacy for its 5,500 congregations and 1.2 million members across the country on a broad range of domestic and international issues through both the UCC's Washington and United Nations offices. Reverend Stief also served on the Washington Inter-Religious Staff Council and the Justice and Advocacy Commission of the National Council of Churches in Christ in the United States. From 1998 until 2000, he was the Executive Director of the Center for Ethics and Economic Policy, which he founded while on staff at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. The center engaged the national faith community in values-based economic policy advocacy. While there, Reverend Stief taught as an adjunct faculty member of the Pacific School of Religion and the Starr King School for the Ministry, both in Berkeley and the McCormick Theological Seminary in Chicago, and served as a member of Theological Educators for Presbyterian Social Witnesses. Reverend Reverend Stief earned his undergraduate degree in philosophy at the University of Montana and holds a master's in social ethics and Master of Divinity degree from the Pacific School of Religion. Reverend Stief.
Thank you. Thank you. Salam alaikum. Let me see if this thing moves around. Oh, that camera. I'm going to move around with it. I'll bet you when Imam Magid's here, you probably already have I'm very pleased to be here, and I want to thank all of you at the Adams Center so much for inviting us here. Just to acknowledge what we just heard, we have two of the giants of the global struggle for human rights sitting here who presented. I just want to give them both another hand of applause because they're doing well. When the National Religious Campaign Against Torture, which was the first thing you said, in addition to all these other things, which I am the director of, when we heard that this task force would be put together, and that this study was going to be done on the facts of what was happening to the detainees in the U.S. sponsored torture program, we decided that we needed to pull together the national faith community in the United States and raise the moral voice to be heard like it has never been heard before on these issues. And so whether it is Buddhist or Sikh or Muslim or Christian, Catholic, Protestant, Unitarian, the different Muslim organizations, whoever has religion in their name, we got a hold of them and said, would you join us in this campaign? And almost without exception, the faith community in the United States said yes. We will lend the voice that torture is always wrong, can never be done under any circumstance, and we will join efforts with these folks to make sure that we get the policies where it never happens again. And as you heard, I work on a lot of different issues, organizing in the religious community. I do not think I've ever run across a place where we all agree as much as we do on torture. And that's an important message for us to think about. It gives me hope, right, in humanity. It gives me hope in us. One of my colleagues often says, if we can't get together and win on torture as a faith community, then we have no business being a faith community. So it really does give me hope. And so I guess the National Religious Campaign Against Torture does represent folks that are doing the organizing out in the grassroots. We have teamed up with Karamah and the Constitution Project to hold 5 of these events in different parts of the country. We just had our first event. Scott spoke at that one out in Seattle a couple of days ago. It was a very successful event. We have other events that are being planned. And then, since this is Torture Awareness Month for the faith community, we have about 80 smaller events that will be happening. One of the things that's happening at these events, and we have our table back there, and we have a DVD that was produced with the faith voices responding to the information that you just heard about what the United States did in the CIA torture program, and talking about the ethics and the morality around that from their different Muslim, Jewish, Christian, and other perspectives. And I think, is a DVD, if you want it, you can have, because we don't want to undersell those Girl Scouts out there, right? By the way, I think Ambassador Pickering and I pretty much bought all the chocolate chip cookies, so there might be one left. But there's a lot of other great stuff. There's some red velvet cupcakes. Well, those probably go on too. But I want to talk about 3 things. Why is there torture? We've heard a lot about tortures out there. Why is it? Is torture ever justified? And something we've heard a lot about so far, how do we end torture? So, on why is there torture? I think you've gotten that we're looking at torture as an issue of a set of policies that the United States government enacted, at least in this current round, post 9/11, which means that it's state-sponsored and state-sanctioned torture. We're not talking about what the individual individuals did, although there were individuals who did torture that is part of the system. But we're talking about how does the state approve that and sanction that. And I think we really understand that this country's relationship to torture did change post 9/11. I think the ambassador talked about the fear that that had created a new atmosphere where torture might be a lot more acceptable than it had been in the past. But torture is nothing new. And so even in the 70s, there was a committee that investigated torture. It was called the Church Committee. It was a Senate committee, not churches like our kind of churches, but Senator Frank Church committee, to look at torture that was being sponsored in the 50s, 60s across several continents. And back then, a lot of it was Latin Americans. It wasn't always that the torture program was looking in Muslim countries. You know, we have to remember this. As a state-sponsored mechanism, the priorities of the state can shift, the issues in the world can shift. But the important thing is we have to ask, why is there torture in any of those scenarios? But if you look at history, it does get applied in different areas. And I was just at a program, I don't see any of the folks here, we had a great program with Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool from South Africa, a conversation here in Great Falls, actually. And we talked about, you know, a lot of the folks that are in Guantanamo are Muslims. I don't know if all are, but I would guess all of them. I would think all of them are. And folks that are being under surveillance. It's a horrible system that backs this program of torture, of racial profiling is what it is, religious profiling. And Ambassador Rasool and I were talking, and we said, and he said, for Muslims though, it shouldn't concern you that it is Muslims who are being tortured. What should concern you is that torture is wrong, no matter who's being tortured. And I think those are the higher ethical principles that we are all trying to introduce into this debate, and we know what's at stake. We often talk about the soul of the nation being the state. Now, nations don't really have souls, but we do have bodies of law, bodies of moral agreements. We have ways that we are bound together. Cooperative activity. I will tell you that when the Obama administration came in, and I do agree that there's still the torture of the force feeding happening in Guantanamo, but the Obama administration came in and day one just said the United States will no longer torture, overturn this program. And yet, a new president coming in a couple of years, with one stroke of the pen, unless we get some legislation off of the work that we're doing on this report, with one stroke of the pen, a president can go right back to that program. Am I right, those of you who are doing this policy? Okay. We're one stroke of the pen away. So we have to realize that torture is really being done in our name. If we have left people in this world so vulnerable to U.S.-sponsored torture, that one president coming in with one stroke of the pen could start this whole horrible torture program up again for any reason, if they can get the political will built. And a lot of times political will can get built if there's a tragedy, a disaster, a certain perspective, a certain mindset that comes in. And frankly, they probably won't check with a lot of us. Let me look at the second question. So that I hope that gives you a sense of why is there torture out there? It's a state program. It's there because, as you were saying, we sort of allow it to happen, but I don't like to blame ourselves as voters. But as a country, we need to not allow it to happen. That's why there's torture. The second ethical question is, can you ever justify torture? And I think Brother Salam at the beginning started to talk about this. It's a classic ethical case where you say, what if you knew that there was somebody who had information that could lead you to a major city in the United States was going to get blown up by a bomb, and that person could have the information, they can lead you to that. Would it be okay to torture that person to save those lives? Well, in ethics, we call this consequentialism. It's if-then. if I can torture this person and get this information, then I can go save a bunch of lives. And that's actually what Vice President Cheney said. Vice President Cheney said, we have a moral imperative to torture. Get that, a moral imperative to torture. Because the failure to do so might make the American people less safe. In fact, people like us, he said, if we fail to torture when we think that we could go save somebody by torturing someone, we're just practicing recklessness clothed in righteousness. That's what we are. We're practicing recklessness clothed in righteousness. And yet, this is a fantasy world, this world of consequentialism, this world of if I torture this person, I can get this information and it can go save lives. We all know that human life doesn't work that way, and the world is not that cut and dry. What if this person gives you information? Yes, the bomb's over there, to send everyone over there, and then the bomb is really over here, and you stop looking and the bomb goes off. So there is no direct path to any program of torture to the kind of information that you might get if you were going to save lives. And if you did get that information, and we heard Ambassador Pickering saying that none of that information was obtained, if you did get that piece of information that saved a life, it would be luck. That's all it would be, is luck. There's no direct correlation. So that's where the National Religious Campaign Against Torture says there is absolutely no reason, there is no justification for the practice of torture. And you can call it a human rights issue, you can call it a safety in the field for our soldiers issue, there's just no justification. So the last one is, how do we stop torture? And I've already hinted at how difficult that is. Because we don't control these systems. This Senate Intelligence Committee, you would think senators would have a lot of power, have worked hard to produce a similar document. And they have been in a fight with the CIA just to get it back so that the public can look and see what the results are. This has been a long process. There are those who have a lot invested in not having information on torture getting out for a variety of reasons, and it's not just to protect the individuals who did it. But we feel impelled in the religious community to build a new framework for policy in this country, one that's based on morals, one that's based on ethics, and one that's based on human decency and human dignity. And we are about that project of doing that. We do a lot of work here nationally, and all these groups that are meeting around the country will go next and meet with their members of Congress. They'll go write letters to the president, they'll sign petitions. We'll have a movement that we believe can set us on a new strategy, yes. So the last thing I want to make is that this isn't just about religion, but it's also about, it's a civic argument. The head of the National Council of Churches just said, and they're a member of the National Religious Campaign Against Torture, if the elected leaders of the United States have the slightest interest in living up to the ideals of democracy and peace, they will not hesitate to use this information, make this report from the Senate public, and then work with us to end torture forever. So that's where we stand on the morals, and we want to give you now another 20 or so minutes to ask some questions, I believe. I right back.
Okay, I think we have a lot of food for thought, and I just want to, as I was listening to all of these stories, I was thinking about the overall picture of the civil rights of Muslims in this country and how each of these things, that especially what Reverend Stief was talking about, the racial profiling, the surveillance, and then how that then translates to now a lot of these Muslims being tortured in these sites and the cases that we heard about. We should think about these things as we think about the questions that we're going to now ask. And I know we have a little less than 30 minutes before Maghrib, so what I would like to do is take 2 questions at a time so that we can answer them relatively quickly and get as many questions answered as possible. So do I have any questions? Yeah, let's take these 2. And if you could speak loudly, but I will repeat the question if we can't hear.
This question is for sure that the report will comment on the rationale of those who want to keep Guantanamo. What was their rationale?
Okay, the question is, what is the rationale in keeping Guantanamo open and operating?
Those who want to keep it open play on fear in the United States that these individuals will somehow leave the custody of the United States if they are brought here. So the Congress has passed a law preventing them from coming here. And I think that's been excited by fear and uncertainty and perhaps mistrust. The others who want to keep them in jail, which is different from not having them come here, believe that the information about them is so important, regardless of whether a trial can be had or not, that they remain convicted even while the burden is on the government to prove their guilt. And so those 2 factors, emotional in many ways, play a major role in keeping Guantanamo open.
And yet there is one thing important that our report discusses, and we have not really covered it here, is that the damage all of this has done to the relationship of the United States to various countries abroad, not just Muslim countries, but countries who are disillusioned about the way we have treated our Constitution. And we need to come to the rescue and make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Are women and children ever detained, or is this just a male phenomenon?
The question is, are women and children ever detained, or is this just men that are being detained?
I thought there was an American Pakistan woman who was detained, a scientist. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're right. And also, young men below the age of 15 have been detained at Guantanamo. Some have been there for more than a dozen years. They were few, happily, but they were nevertheless detained.
Are any of them detained in the black hole overseas?
We don't know, because it was very difficult to find information on who might have been detained. Those that we know who were detained overseas are individuals who've been released, I think all certainly of more than a majority in age, who were able to tell us that they were detained overseas and to give us a little bit of information about where they might have been detained. But they were not told, and there was an effort to conceal during their detention where they actually were.
We have 2 more questions. The audience? Yes, ma'am.
Committees come and committees go. How about bringing a lawsuit against for war crimes against the political responsibilities? Richard Clark was in favor of that just a couple of days ago.
So your question is, are there any lawsuits currently pending for war crimes?
I don't think there are. Maybe DeSantis is doing something. But why not bring a lawsuit?
Why not bring a lawsuit for war crimes?
Scott, do you know? You know the answer, Scott?
If there are.
Any pending lawsuits on
There are pending lawsuits. There are pending lawsuits in
This is Scott Rome, who's a lawyer with the Constitution Project, and we have to go to him for these questions.
Oh, I can shout. That's good. There are pending lawsuits in courts in other countries. There are no lawsuits in this country that have gotten to the point where a court government says the information needed to decide this case is secret and we can't share it.
Could we
Yes,
make
there are
sure
attempts
this is
made
being
that
recorded?
So the question was, can you use the Freedom of Information Act to try to get some of this information public? There have been a lot of attempts made at that on the system.
Yes, sir. The question is, how does the public feel about torture? I think we can ask everyone here how they feel about this event, and if there are other events that are educating about what is happening around the country.
Yeah, sadly, we're losing ground on this issue of public support for torture. Almost half of the U.S. public believes that there would be a reason to torture someone in order to keep them safe. Almost half. It's kind of scary to me. And even in the faith communities, that number is very close. In fact, the faith community, I think, is a few percentage points higher on whether or not they think that it would be okay to torture somebody. And then what we plan to do, we are hoping when the reference was that this report gets released from the CIA back to the Senate and becomes what happened with post-9/11 torture, becomes part of the public record. We do hope to build a legislative strategy, a public education strategy, a strategy of working with the administration, an accountability strategy in terms of what the CIA can or can't do going forward. Those in the advocacy community are already having those discussions. Many of the members of Congress are already having those discussions. And it goes without saying we all need to be behind that 100%.
Fear is a very strong thing. A human being has an instinct for survival. And when there is an impression created in this country that a certain group per se are dangerous and cause fear because of the associations of various acts by a handful of individuals, we have to ask ourselves, what is our community doing to fight that image? And how can we get the media to be also participating in the effort to present both Islam and Muslims as they really are, instead of stereotyping us in negative ways, as we have heard there are some programs about Karamah on various channels. I think the more you talk and the more you let people know who you are, the more you connect and communicate, the less fear there will be and the less chance of estrangement and emotional reaction, as Ambassador Pickering suggested. We have to do a lot more than we have been doing. We as a community have been reluctant to deal with the issue because we were also afraid to be viewed as defending people who are in Guantanamo who are questionable and who might be terrorists. We have this fear. We are not standing by that either. And as you said, it doesn't matter if they were Muslim or Hindu or whatever. These are human beings and should not be treated like that. And we should make a distinction between playing politics and abiding by constitutional values. Karamah, for example, does not talk politics. But this issue is very important to us because it deals with the human rights, basic rights of everyone. Because this did not just happen to us. It happened also to the Japanese during the World War, and it should have never happened again. But it will continue to happen, and the case law would allow it to happen unless there is a law that prevents it from happening.
You know that in the 1930s, a very famous German theologian wrote very simply, and I won't have the quotations exactly correct, but he said, When the Nazis came for the Jews, I was not a Jew, so I didn't protest. And when they came for the gypsies, I was not a gypsy, so I didn't protest. And when they came for the Catholics, I was a Protestant, so I didn't protest. And when they came for me, there was nobody left to protest. So in effect, we're all human beings. We have our religious beliefs and we have mutual respect for our religious beliefs. But in many ways, if we don't stand up in this country for minorities that are being mistreated, then the majority will, sooner or later, have the same difficulties as the problem continues. And that's, I think, what the rule of law means, that we all are treated equally before the law. And we know the United States is not perfect, and we know it will never be a perfect society, but it is horrendous things like torture, which should never occur in this country, and which are part of the battle now. Reverend Stief and Dr. Hibba and friends are all committed to do what we can, speaking to you and others as friends and indeed as committed human beings, to hopefully find a way to put something in place in this country which doesn't allow this to happen again.
We have another question? Yes, sir.
Yeah, if I understood the Reverend, did he say that the forced feedings were still going on under the Obama administration?
The question is whether forced feedings are still occurring under the Obama administration.
Yeah, the forced feedings continue because the hunger strikes continue. And those of you who know, when people in situations of Guantanamo or as you get our organization works on a lot in systems of solitary confinement, long-term solitary confinement, often the only voice a prisoner has is to go on a hunger strike. And it forces a reaction that you can't get by doing anything else. And so the policy is to force feed prisoners, not let them choose to die if that's the point that they want to make with their hunger strike. And so whenever you hear that there's a hunger strike, you also know there's force feeding happening.
Perhaps I could just say something. This was one of the most difficult moral dilemmas for us to contend with. There's no question at all that forced feeding in itself may constitute, if not torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. And the regular forced feeding of individuals who prefer to demonstrate their commitment to the rule of law by not eating, if I can phrase it that way, is undertaken. We decided that we would recommend against particularly cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. But in the end, we also had to recognize that it was the duty of the government not to permit people to die in its custody. So we have a difficult moral dilemma here, which the Reverend Stief has laid out for you and which I lay out for you. And my own view is that forced feeding should be as humane as possible. It should occur only when it is clear that death is near or irretrievable injury is about to occur to the individual. And it should be used to save life.
So when the description was made of the person being forced to eat so much they had to throw up,
that was obviously cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, if not torture.
that's not currently being done?
I cannot tell you because I have not seen it. One hopes that there is a better treatment. As you may recall, within the last week there was a decision by an American court at the district court level, which in effect concluded much the same that our report did. It faced the dilemma and said in the end the government had a responsibility to preserve life.
Not to the point of throwing up.
Well, I can't tell you whether the court actually did that or not. That was not mentioned in the newspaper reports. So you can investigate that further on your own, and you're welcome to join us.
I see 3 hands up, so I'm going to go to you first, and then you and you. Yes, ma'am.
Prisoners are Guantanamo still receiving prisoners, or are they the same people that they get all the time?
Is Guantanamo, oh, there's 2 parts, okay, go ahead.
Are they the same prisoners, or they're still receiving? Is Guantanamo still detaining people anew? My second part is, if they have been there for so many years, they have got the information they wanted to get. Why are they still torturing them? What are they getting by that?
I think that's the million-dollar
It's
question.
causing them actually, talks like this, and it's causing them actually more harm than good. So why are they still torturing them?
Thank you. So it's a 2-part question. The first question is Guantanamo still receiving new prisoners or detainees? And the second part of the question is, if these detainees have been detained, in fact, for several years, and all of the possible information has been gathered from them, why are they still there?
As far as I know, there are no new detainees being placed in Guantanamo. There is an attempt to empty it from those who are in it, but it's going very slowly because of all sorts of obstacles. And as you see recently, there was an exchange of prisoners, and even though it involved American military personnel, the reaction was very visceral against that exchange. And yet, if and when the U.S. withdraws from Afghanistan, there's going to be a settlement of these issues. And so one wonders why not trade for these people instead of letting them go later. As for why they're still being held, I had a feeling that part of the problem is not the information they could give to our government, but the information they might give to others about what happened in Guantanamo.
No, I was going to say, your statement that they're still being tortured is, from what I understand, not correct. The day after he took office, President Obama signed an executive order and stopped that. But they are still being fed, and obviously that is a difficulty. I guess we have to live with it this time because of the decisions. They're slowly being reduced, but not nearly fast enough. And part of that is finding places willing to receive them and not treat them in a way that they might be tortured.
I mean, some of the difficulties is, for example, there are quite a few Yemenis there, but Yemen is having problems at this time. So what are you going to do? It's not, in some cases, it's not clear that their countries want them back or that they want to go there, so where are they going to go? So we have to say that under the current administration, there was a serious attempt to close Guantanamo, but this is a country where no one person rules. So no one person can make a decision of that nature.
I think we had these 2. No, there were many. Okay. The adhan is going to be in 5 minutes. So I'm going to ask this gentleman and this woman to go ahead and help both of your questions. And then if you have time, we shall roll the next papers.
Yeah, I have a 2-part question. Number 1 is my understanding that torture is illegal. And
I'm sorry, what is illegal?
It's my understanding that torture is illegal. That's my understanding. And if that's the case, why no one must be punished? That's the question 1. The second one, why the inmates end up with trial civilians?
Okay, so the question is, if torture is illegal, why is anyone being punished? And if there are any actions currently in civil court? And can I have your question as well, please?
It's a follow-up question on Guantanamo Bay. These people never I'm not sure if they guilty of. So what happened to all the laws in America? Where is the trial? Where is the verdict? So we can say that's not one bad country.
And in fact, have these people even been charged with anything before we get to the fact that no trials and no
You're right to ask the question. First, it's the responsibility of the Department of Justice to enforce the laws. During the Bush administration, the Department of Justice wrote legal memorandums to say, in effect, that torture, or what we believe to be fully torture, was okay. So it was authorized by a small group in the Department of Justice. That stopped when President Obama came in. The question now is the Attorney General to decide whether people in the past committed torture, and if so, what to do about it. So far, they have not taken such action.
You heard of enhanced interrogation techniques? That was torture redefined as a legal way of torture by the Office of Legal Counsel.
I see a hand in the back.
But I do want to say.
Address the other guy.
No, I just want to say that the arguments I heard often made about this situation is that national security trumps everything. And since national security was at stake, then the balance between liberty and security is going to tip towards security. Many of us spoke at that time that this is not a good argument. And the research has shown that when you torture and you get confessions, or what are called confessions, you can't really rely on them. They are not reliable. So actually, you're not getting information that will serve the national security. That's why I called it a fear factor and not something else.
My question is about the recommendation of your committee. I heard you say that you said you recommend that people who are in Guantanamo can be given to their country of origin, and then the United States can, through diplomatic channels like verify or try to make sure that they are actually being treated humanly. Are you really kidding? Or is that serious? Is it a really serious proposition? That's number one. Number two, you also said that the people who have been found that like there were some technicalities in their fights, they will be moved here to the United States and stay basically in places that are reserved for people who are waiting deportation, which means jail basically. So what's the difference? I mean, these people have not been shown to be doing anything wrong so far. They haven't been accused or demonstrated of any wrongdoing. And you guys are proposing that they be kept in jail probably forever because their countries will never accept it.
I think that you raised two very good points. On the first point, let me see if I can remember exactly what that was. That diplomatic assurances about good treatment were things we said should never be accepted. That if you were going to turn somebody over to another country, you should have the right to go and monitor their treatment on a regular basis, including private interviews with the individual, and you should have the right to bring that individual back to the United States if they were being mistreated. In order to close Guantanamo, for those few people where you could not find a place for them to go, we believed it was better to bring them to the United States than to leave them in Guantanamo. And to set up a system, we didn't explain this in detail, which every so many months, there is a major effort to find a place to send them, rather than to let them stay forever in Guantanamo with no hope of release. But it is very hard, obviously, if you have no place that is willing to take them, to force that individual to go to that country. You can't do that. There is clearly, at this stage, or some people at least, no willingness on the part of the American Congress to let them free in the United States, although I personally, in our group, would have supported that kind of a decision. We did not get a majority vote for that kind of decision.
I agree, and I would have been on the same side as you are. This was a compromise solution for the consensus report. But as to diplomatic assurances, I wanted also to mention that we were aware that with respect to renditions, for example, of individuals to other countries, there usually was sent a letter, diplomatic note or something, saying, give us assurance you will not torture. But with a wink, maybe, because these people were going there to be tortured. So we were aware that simply a letter like that or a communication like that is not going to work. And this is why we thought we should go on site and talk to the individuals themselves.
It's now time for Maghrib prayer, and I know that the speakers are still here for further